defining question. So what comes next? Would those who had been oppressed seek revenge? Would they retaliate? Would they simply try to forget the past? In the end, South Africans chose none of these options. Instead, under Archbishop Tutu's guidance, they formed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to address human rights abuses that occurred during apartheid. Instead of seeking revenge, the commission focused on truth-telling and national healing. The goal was not punishment alone, but reconciliation, helping the nation move forward without civil war. As Tutu often said, without forgiveness, there is no future. And Tutu's bold words reminded me of an encounter I had when I was a chaplain at the UCLA Medical Center. And as a chaplain, I was assigned to the Medical Intensive Care Unit, MICU, a place where the air is often thick with the weight of things left unsaid. And one day, a doctor called me for a consult, and he asked me to visit a patient's wife because the medical staff was becoming deeply concerned about her. Her husband, a beloved and brilliant physics professor, had been unconscious in the ICU for 3 weeks. For 21 days, this woman had not left his side, not for a moment. She didn't sleep, she didn't eat. She was consumed by a frantic, vibrating anxiety that was beginning to destroy her own health. As I sat with her, she told me about her husband, a man of immense kindness who spent his life mentoring first-generation college students and donating scholarships for those in need. She told me how they had met and how he had embraced her and her 10-year-old son with a deep and protective love. Then she shared the burden that was killing her. Her husband had once made a haunting request. Please, do not leave my side. I'm afraid something might happen if you are not with me. She had kept that promise faithfully, but one day the friend who usually helped with the groceries and transportation couldn't come. The patient's wife needed to buy food to prepare lunch for her son. Her husband was asleep, looking peaceful. She thought, well, I'll just run to the store for 15 or 20 minutes. But when she returned, she found him on the floor, unresponsive. He had been in a coma ever since, and the doctors saw no hope for recovery. And this woman was utterly traumatized. She was drowning in a sea of self-blame. Her face was a portrait of misery, haggard and tear-stained. She kept sobbing. I did this to him. He told me not to leave, and I left. I destroyed the man who loved me most. And watching her, I realized a profound truth. A lack of self-forgiveness can affect every area of our lives: our health, our careers, our relationships, our parenting, and our general happiness and well-being. When we are unforgiving of others, we experience the same harmful emotional and physical effects as when we are unforgiving of others. And holding on to self-blame keeps us stuck in a prison of the past and limits the potential that lies within the present moment. When we make ourselves victims of our own thoughts and feelings of guilt and shame for what we have done. And to understand why she was suffering so deeply, we must look at the nature of our feelings. Brené Brown, a leading researcher, defines guilt as the feeling that I've done something bad, while shame is the feeling that I am bad. Can you see the difference? I've done something bad, and I am bad. And it is appropriate and even inevitable to feel guilty when we do wrong. Guilt actually helps us stay connected with others and stay on track with our values. The word guilt comes from the German word Geld, which means repayment of a debt. And guilt is associated with doing. If we feel guilty, the solution is often to take action, to apologize, to pay someone back, or to own up to our actions directly to the person we harmed and thus witness firsthand the anguish we have caused. Since feelings of guilt come from specific things we have done or not done, they can only be resolved by taking action. In short, by more doing. But shame is a bit trickier to identify and much more toxic. Unlike guilt, shame is a feeling associated with being rather than doing. When I feel ashamed, it means I feel there isn't just something wrong with what I have done. There is just something wrong with who I am. And toxic shame drives us out of connection and community and makes us believe we do not belong. It makes us think we do not deserve to be in relationships. And this is the biggest barrier to self-forgiveness. And shame makes us small and makes us want to hide because we believe we are not worthy of belonging in the community or the world. Unexpressed shame can lead to isolation, depression, substance abuse, or even suicide. Friends, whether we like it or not, the simple truth is that we are all fragile and flawed humans who commit offenses against others. Sadly, hurting others is part of the human experience, as is being hurt by others. But when we do these things, we are not monsters. We are human beings who have become temporarily separated from our own good. We are not defined by what we have done. Yet, we have been conditioned to believe that we are held in high esteem because of the things we do, not because of who we are. And our worth has nothing to do with the performance, but this belief can make it very difficult to forgive ourselves when we do wrong. And none of us is constantly our best self. None of us is perfect. And looking back at the woman in the ICU, she did her best to care for her husband. She only stepped out for a short period of time to buy groceries because her friend who helped the family couldn't come that particular day. Her husband was asleep and she couldn't predict what would happen to him. If she could have done things better, she would have. We all have to accept the past in order to create a new future. And even if we have inflicted harm deliberately, we all have the potential to change, to confess, to ask forgiveness, and make restitution when we can. And none of us is perfect, but we can perfect the art of learning from our past mistakes, and we can perfect the art of self-forgiveness. And perhaps it is worth some clarity here. Forgiving yourself is not a way to excuse what you have done or gloss over the harm you have created. It's not forgetting about your actions. In fact, it is an honest remembering of what you've done and how you have hurt others. Self-forgiveness is not a loophole to avoid admitting wrongs or making restitution. It is true self-acceptance, accepting yourself as a flawed human being and forgiving yourself for what you did. And some of you might be asking how it is possible to forgive ourselves and wonder what self-forgiveness requires. First, it requires absolute truth. We need truth before we can reconcile with others, and we need truth before we can reconcile with ourselves. We must face the truth of how we are feeling. Do we feel guilt? Do we feel shame? Do we feel grief, despair, or hopelessness? Identifying the feelings hindering our self-forgiveness allows us to transform them. And self-forgiveness also requires humility and hard work. It requires a sincere desire not to repeat the behavior and a sincere desire to change. But most importantly, it requires stepping into unknown territory. At times, we make an identity out of being bad or know people who do. Do you have friends or coworkers who are always telling you how awful they are? Putting themselves down? And usually in such cases, our perception of the person is nothing like the perception they seem to have of themselves. I think the same is often true of us. If we see ourselves as bad, chances are that no one else does. And even when we reduce our self-description to consist only of our worst actions, most people do not see us that way. When we forgive ourselves, we are able to let go of that bad identity. I asked a woman in the ICU, if you could say anything to your husband right now, what would it be? She wept and said, I want to tell him I am sorry. I want to apologize for leaving him. I asked, do you want to do that right now? We stood together by his bed, and for 15 minutes, she poured out her heart, sobbing her apologies and her love. When she finally fell silent, I asked, you found the courage to apologize. Now, if your husband could speak to you right now, what do you think he would say? Through her tears, she whispered, he would say, I love you so much. I understand. It's okay. In that moment, she collapsed on the floor and wailed. The truth finally broke through the toxic shame she had been carrying. I looked at her, waiting for the right moment, and then I shared with her very gently, if your husband says he forgives you, then you are forgiven. I believe he is inviting you to forgive yourself. It was not a command, it was a bridge. It was an invitation to see herself through the eyes of the man who loved her most. She realized that by refusing to forgive herself, she was in essence denying the very love and understanding her husband was offering her even at his bedside while he was in a coma. That realization changed everything. A miraculous transformation occurred. She was finally able to acknowledge her own exhaustion and hunger. She went home, ate a meal, and slept for the first time in weeks. And she was beginning to be free, not because she had ignored what happened, but because she had finally accepted the grace that was always there for her. Friends, in order for any of us to create a new future, we have to accept the past. None of us is perfect, but we can perfect the art of learning from our past mistakes, and we can perfect the art of self-forgiveness. We can transform a painful past into a hopeful future by using our stories to benefit others. And consider the tragic story of Amy Bill, the young American Fulbright scholar and activist who was murdered in South Africa in 1993. Do you know her story or remember what had happened when it happened? Well, she was a